गजाननभूतगणाधिसेवितं कपित्थजम्बूफलसारभक्षणम् उमासुतं शोकविनाशकारकं नमामि विघ्नेश्वरपादपङ्कजं मङ्गलं भगवान् विष्णु मङ्गलं गरुडध्वज मङ्गलं पुण्डरीकाक्ष मङ्गलाय तनो हरिः ब्रह्मानन्दं परमसुखदं केवलं ज्ञानमूर्तिं द्वन्द्वातीतं गगनसदृशं तत्त्वमस्यादिलक्ष्यम् ॐ सहना भवतु सहनौ भुनक्तु सह वीर्यं करवावहै तेजस्विनावधीतमस्तु मा विद्विषावहै ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्ति।
Om everyone. Okay, let's get ready for meditation. Most of you are already sitting comfortably, but let's make some small adjustments to find a very grounded position. Feeling the connection with the earth. Adjusting the feet or the legs so that the connection is solid and that we can feel the ground, a sense of solidity. Making some small movements at the level of the hips to feel both hip bone connecting and settling equally on the pillow. Keeping the spine fluid and allowing it to gently move until it finds an alignment that is at the same time elevated and flexible. Slightly moving the shoulders forward and backward until the shoulder blades just drop and rest on the chest comfortably. And small movement with the neck and the head until it also finds its place. The head resting on the neck and the spine. Relaxing the face. Allowing all the small muscles that usually contract to express our personality or our emotions, allowing those muscles to relax. And relaxing the face is really a symbol of letting go of personality or story, who we think we are. Relaxing the arms, the hands, and letting the finger also relax as a symbol of effortlessness. When the hand relaxes, we stop doing. And bringing the attention to the breathing. First, allowing the belly to expand freely. Letting the chest also move freely. Noticing if some areas of the breath is tight or held. And inviting it to expand and move lightly. Feeling the air coming in and out of the nostril. And listening to the quiet sound of the breath. Letting the body in its most natural state. At the same time, very relaxed. And still. Connecting to the sounds around us. Sounds far away. Sounds very close. And allowing all those sounds to flow through us. Just like the wind flows through leaves of a tree. Nothing to hold on to. Nothing to grab. And let's bring the attention back to the breath. We'll explore connection with the breath as an anchoring. And so if we let the breath flowing freely and just start noticing, observing every moment of the breath. With a gentle curiosity, every instant, every movement is being welcomed and noticed and appreciated. And we'll place a particular attention to the exhale. And connecting to those two elements of the exhalation. One being the element of relaxation. Every exhale is like a very gentle sigh. Something lets go. A grip gets released with every exhalation. And the second quality of the exhalation, that is to lead to a moment of utter stillness and silence. That very small moment just before the inhale starts again, a moment where everything stops. When the mind gets busy and we find ourselves distracted, let's just bring ourselves back to the exhalation, to the release leading into silence. When we find ourselves distracted by our thoughts, when we find ourselves involved in our story, involved in the story of the world, we can take a very firm attitude and tell to the mind, not now. It's a firm attitude, but it's not tight, it's not upset. There's no judgment there. The mind is just doing its work. So we stay gentle and forgiving and kind with the mind. But we come back to the breath. And we keep placing this very tight attention to that moment at the end of the exhalation, at that moment of complete stillness, complete silence. In between every movement of the breath, there's a moment of complete peace, bright awareness. It is like seeing a glimpse of the sky in between two clouds. Seeing the infinite in between two movements. And maybe at the beginning, we only notice that quality of ourself at the end of the exhale. And that's fine. That's where we are today. And so we continue the practice by following the breath to meet that infinite part of ourself right there. But maybe the breath is not necessary anymore. Maybe the clouds are seen in the vastness of the sky, and we can just look at the vastness of the sky. And if that's the case, then just rest, just abide. Like, let every moment, every thought, every movement, every sound dissolve in the endless, still, aware presence that you are.
And then you'll come and make it into gallery. Okay. Thank you very much, Dominique. I'm going to remove my mask. Give up being a good citizen. And thank you all as well for joining us this morning. I can't tell you how happy we are to see you and what a joy it has been to work on this retreat for two reasons. One is to work with this amazing tech team who has had to put up with many golden moments that I've had. And also the joy of seeing you all, this amazing commune where we're all joined together virtually through the spirit of Swami Shivananda, our Gurudev. So I will be the first speaker this morning, and the first speaker tomorrow morning. We're just putting it into gallery view so I can have a better view of you. Ah, yes, there everybody. The pictures are just gradually coming on. The internet connection is not quite as good as yesterday, but we will hope. Anyways, I will speak this morning and tomorrow morning, of course, on our theme, Transcending the Challenges and Suffering in Life through a Spiritual Vision. And we thought to start just looking at the theme itself, the words that were chosen. Because when we chose the words challenge and suffering, we made a distinction. Challenges, of course, we all know. There are those things that we face in life. They may be minor irritations, or they can be challenges that challenge us to the very core of our being. And as Swami Nirliptanandaji said yesterday, these challenges can be outward or they can be inward, meaning our own mind. That's the phone ringing right now, sorry. So challenges are inward and outward. And there's not much we can do about challenges. They just appear to us. But suffering is another question. Suffering, you could say, would be our relationship to the challenges that we face, either inwardly or outwardly. So what is our relationship? Well, one could say that if we have a relationship of desire with relationship to what's happening internally or externally, then our suffering, to the intensity of our desire of wanting or not wanting, our suffering will be more or less intense. In other words, the more we resist, the greater will be our suffering. And I think we can all verify that in our own experience, because we know that if we're being challenged to the core, that if something in us lets go, if something in us says, not my will, but thy will be done, or somehow sees God in it, then the suffering recedes into the background. The challenge may not change. It may or it may not change, but the suffering recedes into the background. So this, I am sure, has been the experience of all of us, that our suffering could almost be, it's a mystery, it could almost be something that is within our control. And maybe the reason that many traditions say that when they ask the question, what is the cause of suffering? They say desire. But Swami Chidananda, he took it a little deeper, perhaps, because, well, what is the root of desire? Why does desire appear in the first place? And so he has said, all our sorrow and suffering is due to a disconnection, better to say an apparent disconnection from the source, support, and substratum of our being. And if there's a disconnection, it means there's a reconnection with something else, or a connection with something else, and that, or an identification, and that is with our body and mind. And so it's as if there's a trade-off between having a spiritual vision when we are connected with our source versus the vision of a human being or an ego, because ego, one way of defining ego is simply identification with the body and mind. So you could say the root of desire, the root of our suffering is ego, and trace it back to the disconnection from the source, support, and substratum of our being. And Swamiji used to say, he says, you follow any yoga, follow any path, any tradition to become reconnected. Do it by any means, but by any means do it. And perhaps one of the most beautiful and vibrant ways of expressing that spiritual vision of abiding in ourself comes from a song that Swamiji said Gurudev sang, and Swamiji said when Gurudev sang it, he shone with the realization of his own self. And when Swamiji sang it, he also shone with the realization of his own self. And I will only say a few words, and I'm not going to sing in Sanskrit, and I will speak them rather than sing them. But it goes like this, and only a phrase: knowledge bliss, knowledge bliss, knowledge bliss, or you could say consciousness bliss in all conditions. I am knowledge bliss, absolute. And Swamiji, when he sang that song, sometimes he would say, you know, many of us miss the point of that song, because we think when we say in all conditions, I am knowledge, bliss, absolute, we mean the outer conditions of what's happening in the world. But in fact, it is much more than that. It's in all conditions of the body and mind. So whether the body is healthy or whether the body is sick, whether the body is strong, whether it's weak, in all conditions, I am that knowledge, bliss, absolute. Whether the mind is driving me absolutely crazy, or whether the mind is serene or in turmoil, in all conditions, I am that knowledge, bliss, absolute. Whether the intellect is being totally irrational or whether it is being perfectly rational, in all conditions, I am knowledge, bliss, absolute. So that was a song that Gurudev sang. And that was a song Swamiji sang from the perspective of the spiritual vision. But today I would like to discuss the spiritual vision from just a little bit different point of view. And it's going to be based on a prayer that Swamiji gave at the beginning of a talk. And the reason I'm taking it from this point of view is that Swamiji really talked about Vedanta in daily life, practical and applied Vedanta, applied non-duality even. And so the perspective that will be shared today is more from that point of view. And I would really like to read, it's an opening prayer to his morning meditation talk. Very relevant for us for this particular theme. So I am reading from Swamiji's book, A Call to Liberation. And the title of this particular talk is See the Great Reality, Even in Obstacles. Or you could say difficulties or whatever challenges we may be facing. Worshipful homage unto thee, thou eternal, all-pervading, and indwelling cosmic spirit divine. May your grace be upon all those sincere seeking souls who are assembled here in your divine presence. Grant them the blessedness of an unceasing aspiration and a determined resolution to fulfill this aspiration. No matter what the obstacles, what the difficulties, what the adverse circumstances. Grant them the insight, the vision, and the wisdom to see these obstacles as necessary disciplines that are meant to strengthen their inner muscles, necessary disciplines that are meant to awaken in them their hidden powers, which then may be manifest and exercised for this great attainment. May they not see adverse circumstances as adverse circumstances, or obstacles or difficulties as obstacles or difficulties. Grant them the vision and the wisdom to see them as opportunities, to see you present as obstacles, not thinking them to be a manifestation of something different than you, something opposed to you, contrary to you, a second factor, a cosmic dichotomy. For we are within the tradition of the great sages and seers of the Vedas and the Upanishads. We believe in a supreme, transcendental, absolute, non-dual reality, which does not admit of any eternal cosmic dichotomy between the divine and the undivine, between the plus and the minus. For us, all this is Brahman. Brahman is one alone without a second. Brahman alone is truth. Truth is one. Therefore, grant them, by your grace, the wisdom to perceive the one great reality in the form, even in the form of seeming obstacles. So Swamiji is telling us that even the challenges we are facing are simply one other manifestation of the supreme reality, based on the great truth that has been revealed to us in the scriptures in India by the great seers and sages in India, that Brahman alone is without a second. Or in devotional language, God alone is. Or Swamiji broke it down a little bit sometimes. He would so often say to us, you are divine. Everything is divine. Know this truth and live your life as an expression of it. So this is perhaps, if we can practice this great truth, this is perhaps, could be one of the most direct and simple ways of transcending the challenges that we face, right from just the minor irritations that we face in life to those things that challenge us to the core. But sometimes we may wonder, and I know I did, I remember I had a first very minor experience of this when I came to the ashram. It just happened spontaneously, but then I was terrified to apply it any longer because I thought maybe I'll go and do something terrible. So sometimes the question arises, is this great truth, God alone is, everything is God? Is this something that we can apply practically to our daily life? And Swamiji, he himself, I remember he came for a morning meditation talk, which he used to do whenever he was in the ashram. And he himself said, the question just popped up into his mind. Are these great truths that have been shared with us in the scriptures and the great teachers, like Brahman alone is, without a second, are these meant to be, can they be applied to our daily life? This question came into Swamiji's mind. And then Swamiji said to us, immediately the answer came. And he said, not only can they be applied to our daily life, they are meant to be applied to our daily life. And he says, the moment we see this great truth on the page of a book, the moment we may hear it being spoken, we can start applying that truth. And Swamiji had so much to say. There was a wonderful talk. It was a very, very powerful talk that is in the book, Seek the Beyond. It is called Blasting the Myth. So Swamiji, so much is said, and it's an amazing talk. Actually, we were celebrating the birth anniversary of the great Shankaracharya. And those of you, most of you, I think probably have been in the ashram will know if you go into the temple, go directly into the temple and go to the right, there is a statue of Shankaracharya. And so we were celebrating his birthday. Maybe it was the 800th birthday. I'm not sure. I can't remember now, but we were celebrating it. And Swamiji said, he says, Shankaracharya, he opened the floodgates of the bliss that is dwelling within us, that the ego refuses to allow to manifest. But then Swamiji said, Shankaracharya had a different way of handling the ego, a unique way. Rather than going through many processes of trying to rub away the ego a little bit every day and then finding it comes right back after we think we've just got rid of it and then it pops up again and again and again. Rather than trying to get rid of it through all these processes, he would say, Brahman alone is without a second. Where is the question of the ego? There's no place for something separate. Why deny something? Why go through all these processes of trying to get rid of something that doesn't exist? Blast that myth to start with. Deny it once and affirm reality alone is. Brahman alone is. God alone is. So Swamiji, he spent 2 talks with that way of speaking, and it was very, very powerful. So he gave us a method. And you know, why is it that simply affirming this truth could work? It is because, of course, when these great teachers are sharing this truth with us, they are sharing it as a fact now. It's not something in the future. So when they say God alone is, it is now. It's a fact now. And so if we actually believe it, if we have enough faith in it, and then affirm it, and actually Swamiji said, deny the ego once, then you're finished. And then affirm the truth. You don't need to keep on wasting your time denying it again. But he did say, affirm it over and over and over again. And he says it's instant liberation. And instant liberation because it's already a fact. But he did say we have to do it over and over again because there may be an instant insight into the truth of it. And yet within nanoseconds sometimes, the old way of thinking comes back again. So again, we have to affirm it. He used to say, this is the land of 10,000 awakenings. And of course, everybody is a little different. And you may wonder, well, I've known this forever and I've been trying to practice it, but it doesn't work for me. And so that's what I thought to focus on. I would say, at least in my experience, and I can't say that it's in the experience of all because I really don't know, but it seems to be that the affirmation of this truth begins to have the power to start liberating us or helping us to transcend these challenges when something in us finally begins to believe it. And I've often said, it took me 16 years. In other words, how does that belief or faith come? And that's where a lot of preparation does come. All our spiritual practices, all our spiritual experiences are meant to take what may be just here deeper and deeper until it becomes a conviction. And these practices and experiences are no longer necessary. So it's not just a blind belief, but it is something in us that finally says, I believe it. And that begins or can begin the process of liberation, the process of being free of the suffering that the wrong way of seeing these challenges brings to us. And so I thought today, maybe I could share with you some of the teachings that have had a tremendous impact on me living in the ashram for all these years, primarily based on the teachings of Swami Brahmanandaji. He was a hidden saint in our ashram. Many of you, of course, know him very well. And of course, Swami Chidanandaji, which I'm sure most of you also know very well. I spent 16 years sitting with Swami Brahmanandaji, and my father and I, we spent many years preparing Swami Chidanandaji's talks from early morning meditation for publication. So there were many things that they said. You know, with Swamiji's books, I still read them every day. But there were things that they said, simple things that went straight to the heart, that somehow the words of great sages of realization that went straight to the heart. And for me, brought that truth to a deeper level. And so just to bring the point about whether we believe it or not, I remember Swami Brahmanandaji, sometimes he would get a little bit exasperated with us. Of course, he was the most gentle being you could ever meet, so exasperation wouldn't look like ours. But anyway, sometimes he would just say, you know, you people, you just don't believe that this world as it is Brahman, or you just don't believe that this world as it is God. And then he would also say to us from time to time, you know, spiritual seekers, they would come to him and they would say to him, Swamiji, so many times I've read the scriptures, so many times I hear the teachings, but I want to experience God. And then Swamiji would say, you see, you are experiencing nothing but God. And this was brought home also by, I'll tell you a funny story. Gurudev, well, it's a story of Gurudev. You know that Swami Chidanandaji, he made his first world tour in 1959. He was away about 2 years, I think. But a lot of the time in that 2-year period, he spent in Vancouver because the lady who invited him, originally Swami Shivananda Radha, lived just on the outskirts of Vancouver, Canada, and that's where my father met him. And because of Swamiji's presence there, a small satsang group formed, and they used to meet in the home of a man named Papa Pegar. And Papa Pegar was a very, very simple soul. And he used to write to Gurudev. And Gurudev, you've probably heard, whenever anybody wrote to him, he would immediately write back. And one day, Papa Pegar was complaining to my father, and he says, you know, every time I write to Gurudev, I am explaining to him the challenges and the obstacles and the problems that I am facing in the present moment. And it's it would be a 6-week round trip for that letter, because it would, in those days, take 3 weeks for the letter to go from Canada to India. And then if Gurudev wrote back immediately, then it would take another 3 weeks to get the answer. So always there was new difficulties and new challenges. But Papa Pegar complained to my father, and he said, you know, it doesn't matter what the difficulty is, what the problem I'm presenting, he gets the same answer. And my father says, well, what is the answer? And Gurudev said, see God in all. So Gurudev was speaking, of course, from his perspective, but as Swamiji said, this is something that we can apply right in our practical daily life if we have the faith for it, the belief for it. Because if we have that faith, then, and we take the risk and apply it, then it will prove itself out in experience. So how is this so? I mean, how is it possible that everything is God when we only see separation? So Swami Brahmanandaji, of course, he taught Advaita Vedanta or non-dualism, and he normally spoke in the language of the scriptures. Especially he did this analysis of the 3 states of waking, dream, and deep sleep. But he had no problem from time to time slipping in to very devotional language. And sometimes he would say to us, he says, you know, that great reality beyond time and space, infinite, eternal, indescribable, without boundary, unknowable, unthinkable. That reality, all the great traditions say alone was before creation. It alone was before creation. And if it was described, it would be described as absolute perfection. And then Swamiji would say, where would God or that great reality get the materials to create the world or to manifest as this world or to be this world, depending on the way you want to say it, except out of himself? There was nothing else to create the world out of. He alone was before creation, or it alone was before creation. So creation could only be made out of itself. And Swamiji would say, you don't connect the dots. It's a very logical piece of information. It's common sense. And then he would say, can something that is perfection itself, that reality which is perfection, can a perfect God create an imperfect world? And he would say, it's not possible. It's not possible. So he says, it is common sense if we would just connect the dots. And what could we say is the result of this vision? If this is something that really sinks into our heart, well, I'll share with you another little story, because it describes Swami Brahmananda, who those of us who knew him would always be established in this vision. God alone is. One reality alone is. One day I was in reception and two young guys came. They were Indian origin, but from London. And they had come to India. This was 30 years ago, early 90s, 1990s. And they had come to India to write a book on Indian spirituality. And it was recommended to them that they meet Swami Brahmanandaji. And so because I was there in reception, I said, oh, I know where he lives, I'll take you to him. And so I took them to meet Swami Brahmanandaji, and we went to, you remember the little green room, which was a corner room of the stage across from Vaikuntha Dam. Many of you may remember we used to have our class there with Swami Brahmanandaji for many years. So we sat in that room, and these two young guys, they started interviewing Swamiji. Well, of course, this was 30 years ago, so I don't remember any of the questions except for one, because I was so surprised when they asked this question. And I remember it because the answer had such an impact. They asked him, what is your experience? And of course, the reason I was so shocked is because one would never dare ask a Swami that. The Swamis in the Indian tradition, Swamis never talk about themselves, and they certainly don't talk about their background. So I was really curious, what is he going to say and how will he answer that? And the reason it had such an impact is it was the profundity of the ordinariness of the answer. And he said, I am reconciled to everything in this world. So that was 30 years ago, and I still remember that answer. I think maybe it didn't have the same impact on the two guys who were doing the interview, because they went to the next question very quickly and didn't even ask him how it was possible. But of course, that answer reflected his inner state. When you look back at the cause of our sorrow being that relationship of desire to our challenges, and then the root of desire being the separate sense of self or ego, or the disconnection from the source, support, and substratum of our being. So that was that had a tremendous impact on me. And he often used to say to us, you can tell how much you've progressed by the amount you worry and the amount you complain. So these are very simple guidelines for us that certainly I have never forgotten. But does that mean, you know, when you're reconciled to everything in this world and you see everything as one, does that mean it's just one homogeneous consciousness, or what does it mean? Do you not see the suffering? Do you not see all the problems? Do you not see this virus? And Swamiji, I think, and Chidananda Swamiji had a beautiful way of answering that type of question. Of course, in the scriptures itself, you know, when they try to explain this to us, they often, many of you will know this analogy, of course, but they often use the analogy of gold and gold jewelry. If we go into a shop where they're selling only gold jewelry, there's going to be infinite designs of the jewelry. Beautiful designs, some that are not so attractive. Now, as a buyer, we are interested in the design. But the person who's selling it, he sees only the value of the gold. You know, what is the weight of the gold in that piece of jewelry? That is what the cost is going to be. It's according to the weight of that gold. So the analogy means all the jewelry, no matter what the design, is gold and gold alone. The only difference is the design itself. So one with a spiritual vision, they say, see God and God alone, whereas we're focused on the name and the form. Or a child going into the jewelry store only sees the design, doesn't even see the gold. So actually it is possible to see both at the same time. So that was the analogy. But Swamiji, he would say to us that Brahman or God, beyond time and space, when it manifests as this world, manifests as the three gunas or energies of sattva, rajas, and tamas. Now, sattva means light. Everything that is taking us towards unity consciousness. Rajas is activity or action, and tamas is darkness. Everything that we feel is taking us away from that, moving more towards ego consciousness. So then Swami Brahmananda says, God manifests as sattva, rajas, and tamas, become reconciled to this and be at peace. So sometimes that truth can be corrupted, because Swamiji, he of course was normally speaking to a very small group and would say to us, you know, we assume when you come to the ashram that you've already transcended the bad. So you're not going to corrupt this. Now it is time to transcend the good. Corruption meaning if you hear that God is even all the bad things, the darkness, or what we say is bad, then maybe you get an idea, well, I can just go and do as I like. But no, that's not true, because when this truth is understood, there of course is no place for something separate. But Swami Chidanandaji realized that sometimes this great truth, that God manifests as sattva, rajas, and tamas, or reality manifests as sattva, rajas, and tamas. So Swamiji said it a little differently. He said that great reality beyond time and space, infinite and eternal, is perfection itself. There's no problem there. It is unity consciousness. But when it manifests as this world, it manifests as these gunas of sattva, rajas, and tamas. So far, same exactly as Swami Brahmanandaji. But then he said, you must discriminate. You must discriminate between sattva and tamas, or light and darkness, but without forgetting that everything is Brahman, without forgetting everything is God. And there is no conflict with that, because even the discrimination is that. Even the choices that we make based on that discrimination is that, and that alone. Because when you say you must discriminate without forgetting everything is Brahman, why that's so important is that when it is remembered that everything is Brahman, it cuts the ego right at its root. So the discrimination is there, but the ego is cut at its root. So that is the way Swamiji said it. And just to qualify a little bit about darkness and what that darkness is, it doesn't always mean what we consider very bad things. It can just mean that we feel ourselves to be full of darkness. We feel we can't move. And I want to share with you how this is applied there, or based on a letter that Swamiji wrote to my father. You all know that after Swamiji's world tour, that he left the ashram for quite some time. When he left, I think he was planning to leave for good. And Swami Krishnanandaji, when somebody asked him, why did he leave? He said, to find God. Swamiji, I think, felt there was still something missing. So he was traveling incognito, and maybe after traveling for about 1.5 years, he wrote a letter to my father. It's a beautiful letter. It has been published at least twice, the full letter. And there's excerpts that have been made into bookmarks and so forth, because this letter was full of love, full of caring, and full of wisdom. But it was one of the few times that Swamiji revealed a little of his inner state. And Swami, most of us really only knew Swamiji as a great saint. They didn't know him during the time that he would be going through any kind of struggle. And there was a paragraph in this letter where he shared that struggle. And I found it so powerful and applicable here. He said, I am struggling to know what the will of God for me is at this moment. And he said, the painful thing is, the frustrating and painful thing is that he only gives light in ration units for this next step ahead. Whereas with human impatience, we want the whole path lit up. Then Swamiji says, but does he care? He does things in his own way. And then Swamiji said, so one strains into the darkness and sees only darkness ahead. But for heaven's mercy, one knows that he is in the darkness. And then Swamiji said, he is the darkness. So that was his spiritual vision. Then Swamiji finally said, but for this knowledge, it would not be possible to bear this night. So that gives us an idea, even when we're suffering in the darkness, to know that not only is he in the darkness, he is the darkness. So Swamiji said, see him even in any obstacle or challenge that we face, that he has come to us in that form. And tonight, we will be showing it Sunday night, and traditionally, we show a video and at satsang, and usually to Swami Chidanandaji, sometimes Swami Krishnanandaji, and it will be, I think it is called non-duality. And you will see the way Swamiji speaks about it tonight at satsang. So these are very simple words in a sense. God alone is, only 3 words. Brahman alone is, without a second. I guess that's 5 words. You are divine, everything is divine. So it's very easy to say these words. They are simple. But the main thing is, how much do we really believe it? And Swamiji, he would say to us from time to time, considering how simple this is, if you're Indian, you've probably heard this practically from childhood. And then Swamiji would say, why is this not the basis of your whole life? You really have to take a look and see. Without, again, making any separation between this type of introspection and it being also a manifestation of that. So even our introspection, we cannot separate from God. You could say it's a manifestation of the Divine Mother Shakti. So it occurred to me, maybe there's some points that we could look at that could help us just wonder what is it that may be blocking this great truth from sinking deeper and deeper. And they're simple, kind of simple questions. One is, how much do we actually really believe this truth? I mean, to each one of us ask ourselves, because these challenges wouldn't be challenges if the faith, the belief, the conviction was complete. So that is one thing. And Swamiji once said, I'm sure probably many of you have heard this, but this is something that Gabriel shared with it. Swamiji said this to a group in Germany when he was there. And he said to the group, he said, it would be a great courtesy to the speaker if you would actually believe what the speaker said. So we have to think, if we don't really believe the scriptures, if we don't really believe what the great teachers are saying to us, if we don't really believe what our own guru is saying to us, are we calling them liars? Well, that's maybe a little bit extreme, but we have to think, why is it we don't believe it? And even that very question, I think, when we look at it, and it just startles us, can take that faith deeper, because it seems very strange. And it was said, the deeper we believe it, the more it will experientially prove itself out to us. And from a devotional point of view, if we believe that God alone is, one reality alone is, Brahman alone is without a second, then of course, whatever is happening in this world cannot but be that and that alone, cannot but be the will of that. So there's a very devotional way I discovered when I first came here, very powerful thing I read when I first came here in 1978. I was reading a book. It was a huge commentary on the Bhagavad Gita put out by the Ramakrishna Mission. And Sri Ramakrishna was a great, great sage in India. In fact, Swami Chidananda once told my father that there was a huge flowering of saints between 1850 and 1950. And he says, during that period, there were two giants. And he said, one was Ramana Maharshi, and the second was Sri Ramakrishna. And then he added later on Anandamayi Ma. But anyway, so this book, this commentary in the Gita was put out by the Ramakrishna Mission. And the Swami who was doing the commentary, he was doing his own commentary, but in that commentary, he often would quote Sri Ramakrishna. And what I read in this was a very powerful statement. He said, when the individual soul becomes fixed in the conviction that nothing happens except by the will of God, liberation is assured in this very birth. So that is a powerful assurance for us. It's a devotional way and a devotional practical way of expressing God alone is. So that is one thing. How much do we really believe it? How deep is our conviction? The second thought that occurred to me is perhaps something that all the great authentic teachings tell us is, how much do we really want the truth? They sometimes say we have to want God realization more than anything else. Sometimes they're very extreme and we have to want it as much as somebody whose head is pushed under the water and they're gasping for breath. But as a practical matter, for those of us who are in the world, or those of us who are living a fairly active life, even in the ashram, I live a fairly active life, except during the pandemic, but normally, then even we have to see, how much do I want God realization? How much do I want liberation? How much do I want to align myself with the will of God? All different ways of putting the same thing. Even if we get to the 51% mark, it's good enough to start with, because it will guide our choices. There may be a huge struggle inside, but if we're 51% want it more than anything else, then our choices will reflect that. So that is another question we can ask ourselves. And we have to remember that living a life in the world is not opposed. Action and living a full life in the world is not opposed to this, to the recognition and the practice that God alone is without a second, or Brahman alone is without a second. Gurudev never said that we had to leave the world or renounce the world and come to an ashram. He said, you can realize God in your home. And the reason is because it is a matter of cutting the source of our suffering at a root, which is the ego itself. And maybe to put this again in a little bit more devotional way, how do we live this in the world? You know, within the boundaries of Swami Nirlipananda yesterday, he was saying that our whole life can be converted to yoga. The very life we're living now can be converted to yoga through a spiritual vision. And one way of doing this is within the boundaries of a moral, ethical life. When I say moral, ethical life, meaning a life where we are able to see ourselves in the other, where we just follow the golden rule. We do unto others as we would have others do unto us. Just that foundation. And within the boundary of that moral, ethical, and the desire, at least 51% of wanting God more than anything else, within those boundaries, live a full life. But what converts it into karma yoga is at the core, there is some form of surrender. And it can be any form we want. At the core, there can be an ongoing prayer, not my will, but thy will be done. So we live a full life, following whatever within the boundaries of a moral, ethical, and wanting God. And yet at the core of our being, there is this prayer, not my will, but thy will be done. Or, as Swami Brahmanandaji said, when I asked him what surrender, he said, it's the recognition that God alone is, and the ego is a zero. But both, they cut the ego at its root. Whether we surrender, not my will, but thy will be done, it flattens the ego. It cuts it at its root. Or just the practice God alone is, as Swami Brahmanandaji said, of course, there's no place for ego. So if we can remember that and pray that or affirm that whenever we think of it throughout the day. So there is no conflict of living a full life within those two boundaries. And perhaps what makes that surrender possible is one other thing that maybe we should consider, and that is giving up any idea that I know. Now, that of course doesn't mean we throw out all our knowledge, but there is something that opens us up at the core of our being. If we just have an attitude of putting a question mark around everything we think we know, then that opens us up to the revelation and the guidance of how to handle whatever challenge is ahead of us. So these are some things that we can consider. And I'd like to end my talk with Swamiji again. It is an excerpt, it's also an excerpt from A Call to Liberation. And it perhaps summarizes much better than I've said what has been said. Swamiji says, the reality is eternal and infinite. He is always and also everywhere always. Therefore, all places are sacred. Being one and non-dual, there cannot be anything besides him. So things that we think are different from him, and then therefore take our minds away from him, are only so because of lack of discrimination and right vision with which we see them. There is nothing wrong with the things that we see, but there is everything wrong with the way in which we see them. Things cannot be changed. They are here to stay. But luckily, things need not be changed because there is nothing wrong with them as they are. We have to change. Our vision has to change to one infilled by a certain mental, emotional attitude of mind and heart, where we look at all things with a spiritual vision, with an awakened divine awareness, based upon the knowledge of reality. All things exist. He is there in them as existence. All things are conscious. And though manifestation of this consciousness may be in varying degrees, he exists in them as pure consciousness. All things have within them the inherent ability to bestow bliss. He dwells within them as this bliss bestowing factor. Therefore, behind and beyond the grossly perceived names and forms, there is Satchitananda, existence, consciousness, bliss, pervading the entire universe. Existence, consciousness, bliss alone is eternal, unchanging, imperishable. Therefore, Satchitananda alone is the reality. Names and forms cannot be the reality because they are perishable and transitory. So how can unreality hide reality? It is absurd. Ponder this. Then you will know in which way you should behold all things. There will be no obstacles. There will be no challenges because we have changed. The world may be the same, but we have changed. We will behold God here and now, the fact and not the fiction. In the midst of the many, we will see the one. Hari Om Tat Sat. So thank you very much. I think I've gone over time. Swami Padmanabhaji, fortunately, he may be a little bit late. So we'll take at least 10-minute break, maybe 15-minute break, because I'm not sure. I told Swamiji, he's at a Shodasi right now, at kind of a 16 days after one of the Swamis left his body. So he may not be able to make it quite in time. So I think we just play the music for the 15 minutes. And again, thank you all for coming. It is so nice to see you all. And see, oh, wow. Swami Nirniptananda, it was the highlight of his talk yesterday when he connected with everybody. So Dominique and Felice and Anna and Swami Sharada and Pavarti and Ingo and Yihan and Karen and Divya Bhav. Yes, and Carl and Lorna. Hari Om to all of you. Oh, and then Paul, Balaji, and Jim from America, Lakshmi from Australia, Rohini, Pia. Wow, it's wonderful to see everybody. And Lori from Edmonton. Candy, I think you've got your mask on. You're the only one that wears a mask like I do at all times. You must be with a group. And Omar Dazini, I think. Omar and Lakshmi. Hari Om to everybody. Anil. Oh, and Mishraji's son, Chandrakant, and Rafael, thank you. Oh, it's so nice to see everybody. Oh, wow. Hari Om to everybody. Hari Om, thank you for coming. So I'll let you go for a nice cup of tea. Om.
Hari Om Swamiji.
Om.
I think on behalf of the retreat participants, I would like to greatly thank you for your time and your
You're very welcome. You're welcome. Thank you, Madamji.
I'm sorry that I have got multiple systems that are making this noise. Thank you very much, Swamiji, for your time.
Oh, okay.
Come on time.
Yes, that's all. You can wait a few minutes. I went a little overtime. I went a little overtime. I need a little break.